Things went from normal to unbelievable in an instant. One man had everything money could buy, and nothing that mattered. He hadn't smiled in 3 years. He hadn't let anyone close in 3 years. But on one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a 3-year-old girl in a yellow dress walked into his office, looked straight into his eyes, and asked him one question. Just one. And that question cracked open a wall he had spent 3 years building brick by brick. He wasn't ready for it. Nobody could have been ready for it. What happened after that question would change 2 families forever. Hey friend, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know who's here with me tonight. Today's story is about grief. About a little girl who didn't know she was healing a broken man, and about a question so small it changed everything. Stay with me till the end. This one is going to stay with you long after it's over. Nathaniel Cross was 30 years old, and by every measure the world used to judge success, he had already won. His name sat on the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. His company, Crossline Technologies, had made him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Magazines put his face on their covers with headlines like, "The Man Who Has It All." Business students studied his rise in their textbooks. Strangers on the street sometimes stopped and stared, whispering to each other, not quite believing they'd seen him in real life. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that the man in the tailored black suit went home every night to a mansion with 22 rooms and slept in exactly one of them, because the others were too full of memories he couldn't face. None of them knew that he hadn't laughed, not really laughed, from somewhere deep and true, in 3 years. None of them knew what he had lost. 3 years ago, on a rainy October night, Nathaniel had been driving home from a work dinner he almost didn't attend. His wife Claire had called him twice, asking when he'd be back because their daughter Emma wouldn't fall asleep without her bedtime story. Nathaniel had told her he was leaving soon. He had told her to wait. She hadn't waited. Claire decided to drive to the office instead, with 2-year-old Emma buckled into her car seat, so the 3 of them could share the ride home together, and Emma could finally hear her story from her father's own voice. They never made it. A truck ran a red light 4 blocks from Nathaniel's office. The last thing Nathaniel remembered from that night, before the world went dark and silent forever, was the sound of his own phone ringing with a hospital's name on the screen. He buried his wife and daughter on the same gray afternoon, in the same plot of earth, beneath the same headstone. And something inside him, something warm, something that used to laugh easily and love loudly, was buried right along with them. Since then, Nathaniel had built walls. Tall ones. He worked 18-hour days because the silence of his house was unbearable. He fired 3 assistants for asking too many personal questions. He stopped attending family gatherings, stopped answering calls from old friends, stopped celebrating birthdays, his own included. Money kept pouring in. Warmth kept draining out. His housekeeper of 4 years, a quiet, hard-working woman named Elena Ruiz, was one of the only people who still saw him almost every day. She dusted his empty rooms. She cooked meals he barely touched. She had learned over time not to ask him how he was doing, because the answer was always the same tight, polite "I'm fine" that fooled no one. Elena had her own quiet struggles. She was a single mother raising her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, alone, ever since Lily's father had walked out before the little girl's first birthday. Elena worked long hours to keep a roof over their heads, and on the days her sitter couldn't help, she had no choice but to bring Lily along and hope Mr. Cross wouldn't mind a small shadow trailing behind her mop and bucket. Today was one of those days. Elena's regular babysitter had called in sick that morning, and with no one else to turn to, Elena had swallowed her nerves, dressed Lily in her favorite yellow dress, packed her teddy bear, and brought her to the Cross mansion, praying quietly the whole drive over that her employer wouldn't notice or wouldn't mind. She had no idea that today, of all days, was the 3rd anniversary of the accident. She had no idea that behind the closed door of the master bedroom, Nathaniel Cross was sitting on the edge of his bed with his face in his hands, drowning in a grief he had never once let anyone see. And she had no idea that her daughter, small and curious and fearless in the way only a 3-year-old can be, was about to wander down that hallway alone. The mansion was too quiet for a 3-year-old to sit still in for long. Elena had settled Lily in the small sitting room near the kitchen with her teddy bear, a coloring book, and a stern reminder. "Stay right here, Mija, Mommy has to clean upstairs," before heading up with her cart of supplies. Lily nodded obediently, the way toddlers do when they fully intend to listen for exactly 4 minutes. By minute 5, the coloring book was forgotten on the floor, and Lily was toddling down the long marble hallway, teddy bear tucked under one arm, drawn by nothing in particular except the endless curiosity that fills small children in big, unfamiliar houses. She peeked into a library full of books taller than she was. She touched a golden vase with careful, fascinated fingers. And then she saw a door slightly open, with a strip of dim light spilling out from the room beyond. Lily pushed it open. Nathaniel didn't hear the door. He didn't hear the soft padding of small feet against the carpet. He was too far inside his own memory. The sound of Claire's laugh, the smell of Emma's shampoo, the particular way his daughter used to say "again, again," when he read her the same story for the 100th time. His shoulders shook silently. His face was pressed into his palms. He hadn't cried like this in front of anyone since the funeral. He hadn't planned to cry like this in front of anyone ever again. "Why are you sad?" The voice was small, unsure, and impossibly close. Nathaniel's head snapped up. A little girl stood just a few feet from him, clutching a worn teddy bear, her dark curls escaping from a loose ponytail, her yellow dress slightly too big for her small frame. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't backing away. She was simply looking at him with the wide, unfiltered concern that only children seem capable of. Concern with no agenda behind it, no awkwardness, no need to look away. "You shouldn't be in here," Nathaniel said, his voice rough, quickly wiping at his face. "Where's your mother?" Lily didn't answer that. She took 2 small steps closer instead, studying him the way toddlers study everything new, completely unashamedly. "My mommy cries too," she said simply. "When she thinks I'm sleeping." Nathaniel froze. "She misses my daddy," Lily continued matter-of-fact, as if she were explaining something as simple as the color of the sky. "He went away and didn't come back." "Did somebody go away and not come back for you too?" The question hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to answer, to send her out of the room, to do anything to stop the conversation, but nothing came out. His throat had closed completely. Before he could recover, quick footsteps sounded down the hallway, and Elena appeared in the doorway, breathless, horror flooding her face as she took in the scene. Her billionaire employer sitting on the edge of his bed with red-rimmed eyes, and her daughter standing far too close, teddy bear in hand. "Lily." "Oh my goodness, Mr. Cross, I am so sorry, I only turned around for 1 second. She must have wandered off, I'll get her out of here right now." "It's fine," Nathaniel said quickly, standing, turning his face away to compose himself. His voice had gone cold and clipped again, the walls sliding back up brick by brick. "Just keep her downstairs from now on." Elena scooped Lily into her arms, apologizing again as she hurried out, shooting her daughter a look that was equal parts relief and gentle scolding. Lily, unbothered, waved a small hand over her mother's shoulder. "Bye," she called back to Nathaniel. "I hope you feel happy again." The door clicked shut. Nathaniel stood alone in his silent room, staring at the empty space where a stranger's toddler had just asked him the one question no adult in 3 years had dared to ask so directly. "Did somebody go away and not come back for you too?" He sank back down onto the bed, his hands trembling, not from grief this time, but from something else entirely. Something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt seen. That night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the room he shared with no one, replaying the little girl's words over and over. My mommy cries too. When she thinks I'm sleeping. He thought of Elena. Quiet, careful, always working, always polite, never once burdening him with her own troubles even as she dusted the shelves of a house far grander than anything she'd ever own. He had never once asked about her life outside these walls. He hadn't known she was raising a daughter alone. He hadn't known she cried at night too. He had been so consumed by his own grief that he'd never once considered that the woman quietly cleaning his kitchen might be carrying grief of her own. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel didn't leave for the office before sunrise. He was still in the kitchen, drinking black coffee in silence, when Elena arrived, and froze in the doorway, surprised to find him there. Mr. Cross. I didn't realize you'd still be home. I can come back later. Sit down, Nathaniel said. Elena blinked. I have work to do, sir, I don't think. Please. The word came out softer than he intended, almost foreign on his tongue. Just for a minute. Hesitantly, Elena lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, clearly bracing for bad news. Maybe she was being let go for yesterday's mistake. Your daughter, Nathaniel said slowly, told me something yesterday. About her father. Elena's face paled slightly. Sir, I am so sorry if she said anything inappropriate. She's 3. She doesn't always understand what's private and what's. She said he left and never came back. And that you cry at night because of it. Elena's eyes dropped to her lap. A long silence passed before she spoke again. Her voice barely above a whisper. She's not wrong. Nathaniel studied the woman across from him. Really studied her, for what felt like the first time in 4 years of employment. The tired lines under her eyes. The careful way she held herself, like someone who had learned not to ask for help. The quiet dignity in the way she still showed up day after day, no matter what she was carrying. I lost my wife and my daughter 3 years ago yesterday, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them, rougher and more honest than he'd spoken to anyone since the funeral. Car accident, 4 blocks from my office. My daughter would have been 5 this year. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Cross, I had no idea. I am so sorry. Nobody outside my lawyers and my board knows the details, he continued. I don't talk about it. I don't let people ask. I built this whole life around not letting anyone ask. He looked up and met her eyes. And then your daughter walked into my room and asked me the one question I've spent 3 years avoiding. Elena didn't know what to say. She simply sat there, letting the weight of his words settle between them, 2 strangers who had shared the same roof for 4 years without ever truly seeing each other. I'm not asking for details of your life, Nathaniel said finally. I wanted you to know that I understand a little more than you probably think I do. About missing someone who isn't coming back. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, something shifted quietly in that kitchen. Not fixed, not healed, but shared. The unbearable weight both of them carried alone had, for one brief morning, become a little less alone. Neither of them yet knew it, but that conversation was the first crack in the walls around Nathaniel Cross's heart. Walls that a 3-year-old in a yellow dress had started tearing down the day before, without even knowing what she was doing. Over the following weeks, something in the Cross mansion began, quietly and cautiously, to change. Nathaniel still worked long hours. He still avoided galas and reunions and anything that required small talk about happiness he didn't feel. But he started coming home earlier. Not much earlier, but enough that he was there some evenings when Elena, unable to find a sitter, brought Lily along again. At first, he kept his distance, retreating to his study while Lily colored at the kitchen table under her mother's watchful eye. But children have a way of closing distances that adults spend years building. One evening, Lily wandered into his study, this time with Elena's permission, since the little girl had insisted, in the stubborn way of toddlers, that she wanted to say hello to the sad man. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop to find her standing in his doorway, teddy bear in hand, watching him with the same open curiosity as before. "Are you still sad?" she asked. "A little," Nathaniel admitted, surprising himself with his own honesty. Lily considered this seriously, the way toddlers consider all important matters. Then she walked over, climbed onto the chair beside his desk without asking, and set her teddy bear down in front of him. "You can borrow Mr. Buttons," she said solemnly. "He helps when I'm sad." Nathaniel stared at the worn, slightly lopsided bear now sitting on his desk between stacks of quarterly reports. Something in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years, cracked a little further. "Thank you," he said quietly, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, his eyes stung. From that evening on, small rituals began to form. Lily would find him after her coloring was done and ask him questions with no filter and no fear. What his favorite color was, whether he liked dinosaurs, why his house was so big for just one person. Nathaniel found himself answering honestly, something he rarely did with adults anymore. Elena watched all of this unfold with quiet astonishment. The stiff, distant employer she'd worked for over 4 years was, bit by bit, softening in the presence of her daughter. Actually laughing, at one of Lily's nonsense stories about a dragon who was afraid of butterflies. She hadn't heard that sound from him before. She wondered if he'd heard it from himself in a while either. But grief doesn't disappear because a little girl offers you her teddy bear. It doesn't vanish in a few kind evenings. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for her mother to finish the last of the cleaning, Nathaniel found himself standing at the doorway of what used to be Emma's nursery. A room he hadn't set foot in for 3 years, kept exactly as it was, frozen in time. Crib still made. Toys still arranged. A mobile of small paper stars, still hanging silent and unmoving above the crib. He hadn't been able to walk into this room since the funeral. Tonight, for the first time, he stepped inside. He sat down slowly in the rocking chair where he used to read Emma her bedtime stories, and he let himself cry. Not the tight, controlled tears he allowed himself in private moments, but the deep, shaking sobs he had never once permitted himself since the accident. Grief he had buried so deep it had calcified inside him came pouring out in that small, quiet room. He didn't hear Elena find him there some time later. He only felt her quiet presence in the doorway, not intruding, not saying a word. Just there, the same way she had always simply been there, steady and unassuming. For 4 years he had barely noticed. "I'm sorry," he finally managed, wiping his face, embarrassed to be seen this way by his own housekeeper. "Don't be," Elena said softly. "There's no shame in missing someone you loved that much." Nathaniel looked up at her. This woman who had lost someone too, who worked herself exhausted every day to give her daughter a life, who had never once complained despite everything she carried. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going?" Elena stepped further into the room, her eyes drifting briefly to the untouched crib before returning to him. "Because Lily needs me to," she said simply. "Grief doesn't go away, Mr. Cross. But you find reasons to carry it anyway. Small ones. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's just getting up in the morning for someone who needs you to." Nathaniel sat with that for a long moment. Outside the nursery, down the hall, a small girl in a yellow dress was sleeping peacefully on his couch, completely unaware that she had just become one of the reasons a broken billionaire might learn to carry his grief instead of drowning in it. Spring came slowly to Chicago that year, but something was thawing in the Cross mansion long before the snow outside began to melt. Nathaniel found himself looking forward to the evenings Lily and Elena stayed later than usual. He started keeping small things on hand, A coloring book, a box of crayons, a tiny stuffed dinosaur he'd bought on impulse during a work trip, feeling foolish the entire drive home for buying a toy for his housekeeper's daughter. He told himself it was simple kindness. He didn't examine too closely why it felt like more than that. He began joining Lily and Elena for dinner some nights instead of eating alone in his study, at first out of politeness, then because the quiet chatter of a 3-year-old narrating her day filled the mansion with a warmth it hadn't held in years. Elena protested at first. "Sir, we're your staff, you don't need to eat with us." But Nathaniel had simply said, "I'd like to if that's all right," and something in his voice made it clear this wasn't an order. It was a request, maybe even a small plea. One evening, as Elena tucked a sleepy Lily into a blanket on the couch and Nathaniel cleared the dinner plates, something the old Nathaniel would never have done himself, Elena finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been sitting on her chest for weeks. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nathaniel paused, dish towel in hand. "Go ahead. Why haven't you moved on?" Not in the way people mean when they say that carelessly. I mean, why do you still live like you're punishing yourself? The money, the big empty house, the 18-hour days. It's like you're serving a sentence. Nathaniel set the towel down slowly, considering the question with more seriousness than he'd expected to. "Because if I let myself be happy," he said finally, quietly, "it feels like I'm saying their deaths didn't matter. Like I'm allowed to just move forward and leave them behind in the past. I don't know how to hold both, missing them and living." Elena nodded slowly, understanding more than most people could. "I used to think the same thing," she admitted. "After Lily's father left, I thought if I ever smiled again, ever laughed again, it meant I didn't care that our family had fallen apart. But then Lily started to notice. She started asking me why Mommy was always sad. And I realized, if I kept punishing myself for what happened, I was punishing her too, for something that wasn't her fault. She deserved a mother who could still find joy, even in the middle of everything hard." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "Emma would be turning 6 this year," he said finally, the words coming easier than they had in years. "She loved dinosaurs. She used to make me do the voices for every single one in her picture book, even the ones that didn't have lines." A small, genuine smile broke across Elena's face, the first time Nathaniel had really made her smile, rather than simply respond politely. "What voice did the T-Rex have?" "Terrible," Nathaniel admitted, and for the first time in 3 years, he laughed, really laughed, at a memory of his daughter instead of breaking under the weight of it. "Absolutely terrible. She used to laugh so hard at how bad it was that she'd fall right off the bed." They talked for nearly an hour that night, trading small memories. Nathaniel of Emma and Claire, Elena of her own childhood and the early hopeful days of Lily's father before everything fell apart. It was the first real conversation either of them had had with anyone in a long, long time. Not an interview, not small talk, just two people, quietly setting down some of the weight they'd been carrying alone. Neither of them noticed Lily, curled up under her blanket on the couch, peeking one sleepy eye open, watching her mother laugh with the sad man from the big house, and smiling to herself before drifting back to sleep, satisfied, in the simple way of small children, that something good was happening, even if she couldn't have explained exactly what. But not everything in Nathaniel's world was softening. At Crossline Technologies, the board of directors had grown restless. For 3 years they had tolerated Nathaniel's withdrawal, his refusal to attend investor galas, his short temper in meetings, his increasing distance from the public face of the company he'd built. They'd tolerated it because his instincts, even in grief, were sharp enough to keep the company thriving. But a rival firm had just made an aggressive acquisition offer, and several board members, led by a sharp-edged executive named Marcus Whitfield, saw an opportunity. "He's not fit to lead this company the way he used to," Whitfield argued in a closed-door meeting Nathaniel wasn't present for. "He hasn't given a public interview in 2 years. Investors are nervous. If we sell now, at this valuation, every shareholder in this room profits enormously. We'd be fools not to at least bring it to a vote. Word of the pending vote reached Nathaniel by the end of the week, delivered by his exhausted general counsel with a warning. They have more support than you think. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something close to fear. Not the raw devastation of grief, but the sharp, practical fear of watching everything he and Claire had built together threaten to slip through his fingers because he'd been too broken to fight for it. That evening, he sat in his study long after Elena and Lily had gone home, staring at spreadsheets and legal documents without really seeing them. This company wasn't just numbers to him. It was the thing he and Claire had dreamed up together in a cramped apartment a decade ago, back when they had nothing but each other and an idea. Losing it now felt like losing one more piece of her. He didn't hear the knock at first. When he looked up, Elena stood in the doorway. She'd forgotten her umbrella and come back for it, and found him staring blankly at his desk, looking more lost than she'd seen him in weeks. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation now, something that would have been unthinkable months ago. Nathaniel explained the board's threat, the pending vote, the very real possibility that within weeks, the company he and his late wife had built from nothing could be sold out from under him by people who saw it only as numbers on a balance sheet. Elena listened quietly, then asked something that caught him off guard. "What did you and your wife want this company to be when you started it? Not what it turned into. What did you want it to mean?" Nathaniel thought back, really thought back further than he'd allowed himself to in years, to late nights at a kitchen table with Claire, sketching ideas on napkins, dreaming of building technology that made ordinary people's lives easier, safer, more connected to the people they loved. Somewhere along the way, in the relentless climb to billions, he'd lost sight of that. The company had become an empire. It had stopped feeling like theirs. "We wanted to build something that helped people stay close to each other," he said slowly. "Even when life got in the way." "Then maybe," Elena said gently, "the fight isn't just about keeping the company. Maybe it's about remembering why you built it in the first place, and showing everyone, including yourself, that you're still the man who can lead it that way." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Somewhere in the last several months, this quiet woman who dusted his shelves and raised her daughter alone had become someone whose opinion he trusted more than most of the executives on his own board. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I mean that." Elena offered a small, tired smile as she finally retrieved her umbrella. "Good night, Mr. Cross." "Nathaniel," he said suddenly. "Please." Just Nathaniel. Something passed between them in that moment. Small, quiet, but undeniable. Elena nodded, a soft blush rising in her cheeks that she quickly tucked away. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said, and left him alone with his thoughts. Thoughts that, for the first time in years, felt less like grief and more like purpose. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Nathaniel spent the days leading up to it the way he used to spend days before big product launches, back when Claire was still alive and every late night felt like it mattered. He pulled old notes from the company's earliest days out of storage. He revisited the founding mission statement he and Claire had written together, the one that had long since been buried under press releases and shareholder reports. He prepared not just numbers, but a case for who Crossline Technologies was supposed to be. On the morning of the meeting, he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie, and for a strange moment, caught sight of Lily's small dinosaur toy sitting on his dresser, where he'd left it after a recent evening of playing with her in the study. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and, feeling almost foolish, slipped it into his coat pocket before heading out the door. The boardroom was tense when he walked in. 12 members sat around the long table, Marcus Whitfield at the far end with a confident, prepared smirk, papers already stacked in front of him outlining the proposed acquisition terms. "Nathaniel," Whitfield said smoothly. "Glad you could make it. Given your recent absences, we weren't sure." Nathaniel didn't rise to the bait. He set his folder down, calm in a way he hadn't been in a boardroom in years. "I've read the acquisition proposal," he said. "And I understand the appeal. Short term, it's profitable for everyone in this room. But I'd like 15 minutes before you vote." He spoke for those 15 minutes about the company's founding, about a young couple with more ambition than money, about the mission to keep families connected across distance, about the small startup that had grown somewhere along the way into something that had started serving shareholders more than the people it was originally built for. "I haven't been the leader you needed these past 3 years," Nathaniel admitted, and the room went utterly silent at the rare admission. "I lost my wife and my daughter, and for a long time I let that loss take everything from me, including my presence in this company. That's on me, and I own it." He paused, his hand briefly touching the small dinosaur toy in his pocket. "But selling this company to a firm that will strip it down and sell off the parts that actually help people, that's not honoring what my wife and I built. That's burying it a second time. I'm asking this board for 6 months. 6 months to prove Crossline can lead again under my direction, the way it was always meant to. If I can't turn this around, I'll step aside and support whatever this board decides. But I'm asking you not to sell the last thing my wife and I built together without giving it, and me, a real chance." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, one by one, hands began to rise, not for the acquisition, but in support of Nathaniel's proposal. Even several members who had privately sided with Whitfield found themselves swayed by the raw honesty they hadn't expected from him. The vote passed. The acquisition was tabled. Nathaniel had 6 months to prove himself, not just to the board but, more importantly, to himself. Walking out of that boardroom, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happiness, not yet, but something close to hope. And the first person he wanted to tell wasn't a board member, or an old friend, or a reporter. It was Elena. That evening, Nathaniel arrived home earlier than he had in years, practically before the sun had set. He found Elena in the kitchen, Lily seated at the table finishing a coloring page of a purple dinosaur, and for a moment he simply stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of them. An ordinary warm domestic scene that had somehow become the thing he most looked forward to every day. "We won," he said simply, and Elena's face lit up before he'd even finished explaining. "You did it?" she asked, setting down the dish towel in her hands. "We did it," he corrected. "I couldn't have walked in there with a clear head if you hadn't asked me what Claire and I wanted this company to mean. So, thank you." Elena flushed slightly, waving off the credit, but Nathaniel could see how much it meant to her all the same. Lily, oblivious to the significance of the moment, held up her coloring page proudly. "Look, I made him purple because dinosaurs can be any color they want." Nathaniel crouched down to admire it properly. "That's a very smart rule," he said seriously, and Lily beamed at the validation. Over the following weeks, the changes in Nathaniel became undeniable, not just to Elena, but to everyone around him. He returned to Crossline with a renewed sense of purpose, launching a new initiative, one focused on affordable technology to help working families like Elena stay connected across long hours, long shifts, and long distances. He credited the idea, in interviews he now actually agreed to give, to someone who taught me that connection matters more than profit, though he never named her directly, some part of him wanting to protect the quiet, ordinary magic of what was growing between them. He started attending Lily's small preschool events when Elena couldn't get time off work, standing awkwardly at the back of rooms full of parents, clapping enthusiastically at a stumbling rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," as though it were the finest performance he'd ever witnessed. He learned, slowly, how to be present in small, ordinary moments again, moments he'd once believed he'd lost the ability to enjoy. And Elena, for her part, began to let herself hope again too. Carefully, cautiously, the way people do after they've been hurt badly enough to distrust their own hope. She noticed the way Nathaniel's eyes softened whenever Lily ran to greet him at the door. She noticed the quiet, steady kindness he showed them both, never with strings attached, never expecting anything in return. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, Nathaniel had quietly set up for the nights they stayed too late to drive home safely. Elena found him standing at the window of his study, looking out over the city lights. "You've changed," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "So have you," he replied, glancing at her. "You laugh more." "So do you," she said, smiling. They stood there for a long moment in comfortable silence, two people who had each lost pieces of themselves and were, slowly, carefully, helping each other find their way back, not to who they used to be, but to something new, built from everything they'd survived. "Can I ask you something?" Nathaniel said finally. "Anything. Would it be all right if I made this a more permanent arrangement? Not the housekeeping." He fumbled slightly, something the composed billionaire rarely did. "I mean, would it be all right if Lily's dinosaur toys stayed here? If this started feeling less like the place you work, and more like somewhere you and Lily belonged?" Elena's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. "I think," she said softly, "that might already be true." 6 months came and went, and Crossline Technologies didn't just survive. It thrived, growing stronger under Nathaniel's renewed leadership than it had in the 3 years since the accident. Whitfield, seeing the shift in momentum, quietly withdrew his opposition. The company Nathaniel and Claire had built together was safe, and more than that, it was finally serving the purpose they'd always intended. But the biggest change wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum, and now, slowly, felt like a home again. Nathaniel had finally, gently, cleared out Emma's nursery, not erasing her memory, but honoring it differently. He kept a small box of her favorite toys, a handful of photographs, the Paper Star Mobile carefully preserved in a keepsake chest. And with Elena's quiet support, he turned the room into something new, a bright, cheerful playroom filled with books and toys, ready for a little girl who had slowly, without either of them fully planning it, become part of the fabric of his everyday life. Lily, now closer to 4, had taken to calling him Nate instead of Mr. Cross, a small shift that had happened so naturally neither of them remembered exactly when it started. She no longer needed permission to wander into his study after dinner. She simply came, climbed into the chair beside his desk, and told him about her day, certain of her welcome. One evening, as the three of them sat together on the back porch watching the sun set over the garden Nathaniel had recently started tending, something Claire used to love doing, something he'd abandoned for 3 years and only recently found himself returning to, Lily looked up at him with the same open, fearless curiosity she'd had the very first day they met. "Are you still sad?" she asked, echoing the question from all those months ago. Nathaniel considered the question honestly, the way he always did with her. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think I always will be, a little. I miss them very much. But I'm not just sad anymore. I'm happy too. Both at the same time. Does that make sense?" Lily nodded solemnly, satisfied with this answer in the straightforward way small children accept complicated truths. "Mommy says that's called healing," she offered. "Not forgetting. Just healing." Nathaniel looked over at Elena, who smiled softly, a little embarrassed to hear her own words repeated back so plainly. He reached over and took her hand, something that had become natural between them over recent weeks, though neither had rushed to name what exactly they had become to each other. "Your mommy," Nathaniel said quietly, "is very wise." "I know," Lily said entirely without modesty, and both adults laughed, the easy, unguarded laughter of people who had, against every odd, found their way back to joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the garden in soft gold light, Nathaniel found himself thinking, not for the first time, about how strange and unpredictable life could be. 3 years ago, he had lost everything that made his house feel like a home. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a 3-year-old in a yellow dress had wandered into his room and asked him one simple question. And in doing so, without meaning to, without even understanding what she was doing, she had started leading him gently back to life. A year to the day after Lily first wandered into his room, Nathaniel Cross stood in the same mansion, but it didn't feel like the same house at all anymore. The halls that once echoed with silence now held the sound of small footsteps, of Elena's laughter drifting from the kitchen, of a little girl narrating elaborate stories to a small army of stuffed animals in what used to be a nursery frozen in grief and was now simply, joyfully, a child's playroom. Nathaniel had proposed to Elena 2 months earlier in the garden at sunset, with Lily, now fully in on the secret, presenting the ring box with great ceremony, having insisted on being the one to carry it. Elena had cried. Lily had cheered. And Nathaniel had felt, for the first time in 4 years, something that could only be described as complete. They didn't rush the wedding. They wanted it small, quiet, meaningful. Just close friends, Elena's small family, and the new life the three of them were building together, one ordinary beautiful day at a time. At Crossline, Nathaniel launched the company's largest philanthropic initiative yet. A foundation, quietly named in memory of Claire and Emma, dedicated to supporting single parents balancing work and family, offering scholarships, childcare grants, and flexible job opportunities to families like the one Elena had once struggled through alone. He never spoke publicly about the personal story behind the foundation's creation. Some things he'd learned didn't need an audience to matter. On the anniversary of the accident that year, the same day, 3 years after the first time Lily had walked into his room, Nathaniel visited Claire and Emma's grave as he did every year. But this year, for the first time, he wasn't alone. Elena stood beside him, her hand in his, and Lily knelt at the foot of the headstone, carefully placing a small bouquet of yellow flowers, the same color as the dress she'd worn the day they met. "I brought someone new to meet you," Nathaniel said quietly to the headstone, his voice steady in a way it hadn't been in years. "Her name is Lily. She's the reason I'm still standing here. I think you both would have loved her." He wasn't healed completely. He understood now that grief like his never fully disappears. It simply changes shape over time, becoming something you learn to carry instead of something that buries you. But he wasn't drowning anymore. He was living. Truly living, for the first time since that rainy October night 4 years ago. As they walked back to the car that afternoon, Lily's small hand in his, Elena's arm looped through the other, Nathaniel thought about how strange it was that the wealthiest man in the room had once been the loneliest, and how it had taken the innocent question of a 3-year-old girl in a yellow dress to remind him that connection, not money, was what made a life worth living. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect plans. It comes quietly, from a small hand reaching out, from one honest question asked without fear. No amount of wealth can fill the space that love leaves behind when it's gone. But sometimes, if we let it, new love finds its way gently back in, and reminds us how to live again. If this story touched your heart tonight, take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this story reach more people who might need it. Subscribe if you'd like more stories like this one, and please share it with someone you love. Someone who might need a reminder today that healing is always possible, no matter how long the road feels. Thank you for staying with me till the end. I'll see you in the next story. Yellow Heart.